Welcome to the DEC4 podcast. You can access episodes, companion articles, research notes and links, as well as information about our contributors and supporters at dec4podcast.com. Hope you enjoy the program. Gary, great to see you. A very, very warm welcome back.
Good to see you, sir. Nice to be back.
This episode we are talking about more American Graffiti and a remarkable Hollywood studio called American International Pictures, which will be in our second part. But first of all, more American Graffiti. It's the sequel, of course, to American Graffiti. And thanks to your great series of articles, we've had some really wonderful insights into that movie and to the making of it and the difficulties. So just to recap and get our bearings. Now, Gary, now this is from your article. George Lucas made American Graffiti in 28 days for $775,000. The test audiences loved it. Universal hated it. The producer, Francis Ford Coppola, was so annoyed he offered to buy it back from the studio. They eventually released it in 1973, grossed $55 million on its first release, around about $325 million in 2020's dollars. In 1978, it was re-released, made another $63 million, bringing the total to $118 million at that point, or $697 million in more current dollars, one of the highest cost-to-profit movies in history. In 1979, a year after the re-release, the sequel was released. That was in general release for 126 weeks, grossed $15 million on a budget of $3 million. Gary, can you perhaps just introduce us to more American Graffiti and perhaps why it deserves perhaps a little more attention or appreciation than it might have had?
Well, I feel the need right off the bat to start off with a little bit of discussion about sequels in general. You know, a lot of us, we fall in love with a movie and, you know, we would love a sequel because you want more. You know, you want more of those characters. You want more of that story. You want more of the vibe that filmmaker has brought. And you can't stand to have it end. It's 90 minutes long or whatever, and you want more. I mean, that's obviously apparent with the bigger franchise films that are made, you know, from the get-go. The intention is to make a trilogy, to make 2 movies, 3 movies, 4, 6, whatever. People just want more. And the problem, I guess it's a problem with sequels, is that it's so hard to recreate that feeling and that vibe. So many things happen, whether it's business or actors, changes to their status and their willingness to go back to that world or whatever. But so often the sequel will suffer for any great and popular film because, you know, we can talk about The Godfather Part 2, which is one of the greatest films ever made, not the greatest sequel, one of the greatest films ever made. You know, but for every one of those, there's like a Caddyshack 2 or The Two Jakes, the Chinatown sequel. The Sting had a real dud of a sequel. So it's so easy to fumble that. Eddie and the Cruisers too. But so often I get ticked thinking, why can we not just assess that film kind of on its own? Or maybe even more importantly, if only the filmmaker had just disassociated that sequel from the original and maybe branched off and told his own sort of story, maybe the films would be assessed differently. So having said all that, more America is funny. We're talking about we want more. Well, perfectly, this film is called More American Graffiti. So the attempt is to give the viewers more of that same thing. Most of the characters are back. And the idea, of course, we all know Where Were You in 62? American Graffiti took place one night in 1962. So the obvious idea would be to tell more of the stories of these people as they progress throughout the years. So what we end up with More American Graffiti is what they've done is they've chosen individual years. They've gone through and they've started with 1964, 65, 66, and 67. And it's almost much like Lucas did with the first one, kind of compartmentalized stories. More American Graffiti is the same. They've broken it up into years. So as briefly, I guess, what they've done is they've made a sequel and they're telling the stories in these 4 different segments. Now, George Lucas had wanted to do a sequel. He was he was game until a lot of his friends maybe advised him against it. Now, maybe the sequel stink was already out there and they were thinking, don't go back, continue to go forward, whatever. Of course, he was huge at that point after Star Wars. So he decided, though, that he wanted to do the sequel, but he had many irons in the fire and couldn't do it himself, but he didn't really want to, turn his characters over to somebody else. But at the same time, I like to think that he thought, but I want these characters to live on. I want this film to happen. So maybe the lesser of two evils is to farm it out to somebody to get it made. And so he did that. And the unknown filmmaker that he used, George, that's a different story unto itself. Fascinating.
We'll get to Bill L. Norton because, as you say, he is fascinating, but his father is even more fascinating.
Yes.
But it's interesting you mention the characters are taken off in their different life's journeys. The Vietnam world was very different to this rather chaotic world of the hippies and musicians, and we had John Milner's world at the racetrack, very sort of, Southern California sunshine kind of thing. But it's kind of no coincidence that we see it so separately. Can you explain how they actually shot the different sequences, which reinforces how separate they are from each other?
Yeah, it was actually fascinating to learn that different methods were employed to shoot the different sections. And it's not really super easy to detect on a first viewing or a third or fourth, but once you have the information, you go back and it becomes a little clearer. So the 4 segments are shot, and it was Lucas's idea to come up with a different visual style for each one. So like you say, 1964 was John Milner at the racetrack and the drag racing world, which I always kind of think is kind of cool because we haven't progressed too far into the counterculture and the hippie world yet. There's still a greaser type mentality with John Milner and his gearhead friends. All they want to do is race, the same as in 62 or 55 even. So I like that idea and that milieu, and a drag racing film with a wide angle. They shot the drag racing sequences to make it look like that. And there's a definite visual look, especially the crane shots, or however they shot them from a helicopter or whatever, down on the track. It's very grand. It's very much like a drag racing film, and it's very visually kind of big in that wide angle. 1965's Vietnam sequences were shot in 16 millimeter, which would take, especially those who lived through that, take people back to the era of the television reports. We've all read the essays and the books about the family around the table, and every night on the news was more carnage about Vietnam and the casualty list. It's hard to imagine the tension in America every evening around the TV. So 16 millimeter, it looks like a television report. It's a smaller frame. And it's even, I find it a little grainier, a little darker than the rest of the film. The psychedelia of 1966, there's a lot of split screen technique borrowed from films like Woodstock or even Elvis on Tour. There's a lot of playful 2, 3, 4 images on there. Candy Clark will appear, and as she's turning her head, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 little frames within the frame. So it's really eye-catching, and there's some great sort of Dayglow type graphics, and it's very, because, and I believe that, we have to have these different visuals for the viewer to be able to differentiate where they are in the film. Once they cut to a different segment, we have to know just by looking where we are. So as the film goes on, I think your eyes get more accustomed to that. 1967, the final segment, which deals a lot with student demonstration time, the protests on the campuses, very much a style borrowed from student rebellion films of the late 60s, a lot of more exploitative maybe, or underground even films. It's very kind of stark, very light, and it's very, I don't know, I always feel like it's very, there's a frustration just in the image and in the visuals you get from that, because there's so much, negativity going on, and it seems to be echoed in the frame. So as I've said, again, it wasn't I don't think it was a super popular way to shoot a film, almost like a compilation of 4 separate stories. So for each main character and each story and each year has its own definite look, which I think really helps the viewer. Not that we would have much of a problem nowadays. Maybe back in the day, the idea was to help the viewer know where they are and who they're talking about, because it's not necessarily a linear story.
We mentioned the director earlier, Bill L. Norton, writer and director. He has an interesting career and very solid career in television in later years. As we record this, he's still with us. Now, he is an interesting guy, but his father was particularly interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about Bill L. Norton's dad?
Okay, well, stand back. William Norton, he was a screenwriter, and he had been a communist since his teens, but it didn't stop him from being an officer in the Second World War. Home from the war, he wrote episodes of The Big Valley mostly. He wrote a lot of exploitation films for my beloved American International Pictures, which we're going to hit on. Among them, he did write the screenplay for I Dismember Mama.
Right.
From 1972. Perhaps, I don't know, is that the greatest film title ever? I mean, and he wrote many Burt Reynolds vehicles, White Lightning and Gator, two films I love. He wrote a lot of great, drive-in movies, hillbilly movies, Rum Runner, whatever, out in the woods. Then he hauled off and moved to Ireland in the mid-'80s and took a look around and began to become troubled by the violence that was going on in that country at the time. So, like any of us would do, he headed back to the U.S. and he got to work gathering weapons. He gathered a truckload of weapons and somehow smuggled them to the IRA. Yeah, I guess he was bored or whatever. He said, I got an idea. He was caught, and then he ended up in the slammer and served 19 months. He was jailed in Ireland. He was not able to return to the States. So again, like all of us would do, he settled in Nicaragua.
Yep.
Where one night he shot and killed a robber during an invasion of his home.
Goodness me.
And then, like all of us would do, he moved to Cuba in the 1990s, but he soon became a little disenchanted with communism. So again, like all of us would do, he had his family smuggle him back to the U.S. and he settled in Santa Barbara.
Yep.
And I can always picture him sitting in Santa Barbara just waiting. Surely somebody will knock on the door of the FBI and haul me away. But that FBI visit never came. I thought it was clever that I discovered on his deathbed in 2010, a nurse asked him, would she know any of his films? No, he said, I don't think your IQ is low enough. Oh. So, William Norton, but you know what that makes him? One of our guys. He's one of our maverick types who looked over the horizon and saw things differently and went a little bonkers and had some fun. And along the way, he wrote some interesting films. I mean, his son, in comparison, is absolutely docile, but his son followed him into the business. His son,
Bill L. Norton, is there any other particular films of note that you'd like to highlight of his before we perhaps move on to the film and the story and the actors?
Well, it's funny you should mention because it's like when you drill down into Elvis Presley movies, the people who worked on them, they didn't do a whole lot else. And Norton the younger, he's the same way. He didn't do a whole lot that stands out. Now, he did direct a couple of films that would be of interest to us drive-in movie types and that same sort of American International vibe. He directed Cisco Pike in 1972 with Chris Christopherson, Outlaw Blues with Peter Fonda and Susan St. James in 77, but probably his biggest claim to fame before More American Graffiti, or maybe even alongside More American Graffiti, is Convoy, starring Chris Christopherson and Ali MacGraw, which, you might kind of side-eye or snicker at Convoy, but it's one of those fantastic films that is just resilient and it's always a good watch. So
yeah, definitely.
So the capper for me personally, not for probably any other human, is the fact that he provided the story for the Beach Party reunion picture Back to the Beach in 1987, starring Frankie and Annette, and all of the old gang was on hand. I love that film, and somehow he said, I got an idea, and that was his story for that.
He did go on to work in television as well, directed a couple of the Law and Order franchise and some various, reasonable profile television as well.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the film now. We do get an idea of what is in store for our favourite characters at the end of American Graffiti. They just have those little notes on the screen. At the end, we know poor John Milner is killed by a drunk driver, which, as you've pointed out, kind of makes, because he's so likeable, it makes his screen time that much more poignant because you know what's coming. We also see that Terry Toad goes missing in Vietnam, which we'll talk about in a minute. But one of the things that struck me as quite interesting is we see Ron Howard and Cindy Williams, Steve and Laurie are married. Domestic bliss is not what it's cracked up to be. And initially, Steve is not a particularly sympathetic character. He's quite intolerant when Laurie wants to get a job and he says, no, you're not going to, which is an interesting, I guess, statement on marriage then and now. Can't imagine what would happen in my household if I said that.
Mine either.
Actually, I can. So it's interesting. So, of course, Laurie goes off with her brother and becomes an unwitting campus protest hero. And you know that Steve is coming good when he's trying to get into the school and he flashes his insurance badge at the police cordon to get through so he can come and take care of Laurie and intervene. And he, of course, becomes another campus protest hero. This very unlikely but really brilliant storyline. What are your thoughts on this and how that particular aspect of the story unfolds?
Well, I think it's very interesting because Ron Howard, well, I'm not surprised to learn that Richard Dreyfuss, who played Kurt Henderson in the original film, he wouldn't sign on for this sequel. I guess he was on a pretty good run at the time.
Yeah.
So it was really no surprise. I mean, by 79, he was, an unlikely star. Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The Goodbye Girl, the guy won an Oscar. So I always find when I see him interviewed in later days, he strikes me as the type of guy who is not condescending exactly, but I feel like he would have thought that a sequel would have been a step backward or a little bit beneath him. So he wasn't gonna sign on. So when that happened, that's when Ron Howard came on board. And out of necessity, the Henderson family gained a child. I mean, Andy Henderson is not mentioned at all in the first film. I mean, it's not necessarily that he would have been anyways, but so he shows up because that makes him the perfect age to be at school and to be protesting. So it's funny, Will Seltzer played Andy Henderson. He was the second choice to play Luke Skywalker. He just missed that by I don't know by how much, but it's funny. He was the second choice to play Luke Skywalker, but he didn't do basically anything else. So this is interesting. And as you say, it's a definite statement on, marriage interactions of the day. None of us can be surprised to hear Steve take this angle of you should be in the home raising your kids. Now, sidebar, their two kids, their twins, are absolute savages. And
yes.
I got to side with Steve saying, woman,
yes.
You got to stay home. Something is wrong with these children. Like, as a father of two boys, I actually have trouble watching this because I'm swinging at things. They are enraging to watch. So let's just put that aside. Laurie should really stay home. But anyways, so yeah, that dynamic. And I'm telling you what, these two guys, Ron Howard, Cindy Williams, they do really well. They have a really good dynamic. You are really, you're invested in the rise and fall of their arc and their relationship. They are both really dialed in. And like I say, Ron Howard is a fairly big star at this time on Happy Days, and Cindy Williams is doing well on television as well. So the fact that they signed up for this is points for them. And it's handled very believably that she would get called to the school to help her brother out. He needs his wallet or whatever. He's going to burn his draft card. And to see her caught up in that and the carnage and the chaos of those school scenes is wonderful. And if you watch closely certain different times during that sequence, Cindy Williams, I think she's 32 at the time or whatever. She's luminous. She is really attractive as Laurie at that time. So it really works. And there is a bit of a chaos, a lot of cops. And it's fascinating for me, to think that, she starts out against the actions of her brother, and she's even in a group defending the president, and she gets jeered. And so all of this is very, very authentic and very well presented. But then it's also made clear that she starts to see kind of the savagery, the way these police are reacting to these kids, essentially. And she tends to at least understand where her brother is coming from. And so for her to be, I wouldn't say she's necessarily on board, but she gets it now. She's caught up in it. And the fact that these cops it's like the National Guard are converging, she begins to get it. And then You mentioned Steve coming on the scene, and he does well too. And he is really handled roughly by the police. And when he sees the way that, he pays taxes and he lives in this state, and these are the cops that are supposed to look after him. They're pretty violent, and being violent towards the women in the bus, that turns him off, and that gets him on board. Maybe not as a straight up protester, but he understands as well. Same as Laurie. On the bus, it's very poignant when that young girl is singing and the matron on the bus slaps her face, which is a slap in the face is not, it is violent, but there's an extra added thing of condescension. There's slapping your face is very insulting in a way. That really strikes Laurie, and then she begins to sing, and the whole bus takes over, and that's poignant as well. So that part of the film, it wasn't my favorite when I first began to watch the film, but it really has grown on me over the years, and a lot of it is down to Cindy Williams and Ron Howard as well. They both do really well in that segment. Once again,
a very different world to the racetrack and to the campus protests. And we see this, as you said, it's no coincidence that we see this as a clearly defined separate universe. And of course, we're in Vietnam now. Terry Fields, Toad, is jaded and, fed up soldier. It's clear he's with Pharaoh Joe, Bo Hopkins, on the helicopter cruise, and they get this new pilot, Bob Sinclair. He comes in very gung-ho and very patriotic and very keen, and he soon realizes that it's not what it seems.
Bob Sinclair, tough but fair.
Yes.
He comes on the scene, and you know what? I'm really bad at debating or picking a side, because I'm cursed with this ability to see everybody's point of view, which is challenging, especially in this day and age where people pick a side, man, that's it. But regardless of the insanity that's going on over there, I can't help but understand and agree to some point with those who were engaged in that and were called upon and saw it as duty and wanted to do their best. I mean, you use the word patriotic. I mean, maybe something has sort of happened to that concept down through the years, but there were certainly people back in that day who believed in their presidential administrations. They believed in their country. And if this was the decision, then I'm on board. And those people really can't be blamed, because they're fulfilling their duty. Now, we can talk about the other side and the realities of the protesters. And down through the years, we've learned a little bit about the veracity of this war. And again, that brings up both sides have very valid points. Bob Sinclair comes in gung-ho. He's got a job to do. He's going to do it. He acts in a way that is very broad, and you sort of know that maybe you think you know what's going to happen to this guy as this segment rolls out, but he's got a job to do and he wants to do it. Of course, Toad and Pharaoh Joe are gobsmacked that he's volunteered them for this medevac duty. It's funny too, because the commanding officer, let's follow him, let's obey orders, but it's made plain here that Toad and Joe, they know what this means, medevac. They know the danger. Bob Sinclair just arrived. He doesn't yet. He thinks I'm going to volunteer for this. Let's go. And it proves to be lunacy, and it's crazy. Again, heroic. I'm not sure what's more heroic than those chopper pilots who flew into danger zones, war zones.
Yeah.
To pick up wounded soldiers. But at the same time,
Absolutely.
These things never went off perfectly. They were fraught with imminent peril, as the phrase goes. It is lunacy. And to have Bob Sinclair freeze in the heat of battle, of course, adds more drama. He's just lost Pharaoh Joe. He's in the middle of the maelstrom now, and he's starting to get the picture. And it's Toad who doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to really be a soldier even, who becomes a soldier and saves his life, knows what to do, does it, doesn't like it, but knows what must be done to get out of the situation. So he essentially saves Bob Sinclair's life, and Bob is not only indebted to him, but he begins to see Toad's point, which is interesting, because with the Laurie and her brother Andy, the same thing happened. It's this this awakening, this eye-opening of, I think I'm understanding the other guy's side. Bob Sinclair has seen this carnage, and now he knows, well, okay, whoa, I guess I have to tread lightly over here in this war zone because there's danger afoot. Then they become sort of buddies, and the story goes from there with a CO who is even worse than Sinclair, the commanding officer of this whole area. He's concerned about this visiting politician. He's concerned about how he looks. He's concerned about putting this face forward for the senator or whatever he is. And also, of course, for the broader world, for the papers, for the news or whatever, go back to the States and tell how we're heroic over here and we're doing this job. So, of course, that leads to his, cruelty or his insane treatment of his troops. And then it goes downhill from there.
We've talked about this briefly, and you've written about this, the storyline where Terry, whacks on a Hawaiian shirt and deserts. And I think both of us, maybe it doesn't quite, I don't think it detracts too much from the movie, but it kind of doesn't ring true. My thoughts are that Terry Fields probably would have been a dedicated but probably slightly inept soldier, and probably would have got himself killed trying to do a good turn for somebody, trying to save their life in reality. But the desertion storyline doesn't quite ring true. Can you talk us through that a bit?
Yeah, it's almost like Lucas and Norton and Terry Fields, they all sort of get away with this, and it really rankles me. And I can't believe that, other people wouldn't understand and even agree with what we're going to roll out. But it's very problematic for me. We've just talked about both sides of the story and the insanity of the Vietnam War in particular, war in general. It's understood. Okay, we shouldn't be fighting this war. This has gotten away from us. This is wrong. We won't argue that. You could, I think, but we won't argue that. And hippie types might get mad at me, but I just frown on Terry. The insanity of Vietnam is established fact in history and in this film. The film drives it home well. The war is ludicrous. And, no doubt it's peppered with idiots like Toad CO. It is easily argued that, young men were sent to kill those at the other end of the world for murky reasons and to achieve an impossible goal. But consider that Toad fakes his death and walks away from the conflict. Even Sinclair shakes his hand and, wishes him luck. And then Sinclair says bye to him, turns around and goes back to fulfilling his duty and fighting and maybe saving somebody else who's paralyzed in the ditch and scared. He goes back to doing his duty and doing what he was called upon to do, whether it's right or wrong. We won't get into that. So it's sad at the end of American Graffiti, the first film, and it's sad and shocking. In the end, the final title card of Lucas's, you could talk about forever and what it means, where it's a punch to the gut to read that Terry was missing in action, like in Vietnam. And we're all crying how sad that is. What a depressing end. That's too bad. Poor little Terry. But when more American Graffiti rolls around, missing in action, how sad for its family. No, at the end of more American Graffiti, he's smiling and singing as he goes off, absent without leave. The war is over for me, he says, or something like that. Too bad my family will think I'm dead, but oh well. It's not a deal breaker, as you've said, but if anything, it's an interesting aspect because it gives you something to wrestle with, gives you something to fight about, gives you something to talk about. It's a talking point. What do you think about that? Me? It really, really does sort of irk me because it's a duty that was shirked. And even though we could get into the weeds discussing that duty and the morality of it or whatever, he shirked it and walked away, leaving others to work and fight and take care of their duties. So that part doesn't sit too well with me. But again, it's not a deal breaker. And you know what? Charles, he wasn't Charlie anymore. Charles Martin Smith, he does really well in the film. He plays Terry. He plays Terry well.
Yeah, it's a great performance. Like he retains enough of the character or the personality of the younger Terry in the first film.
Yeah,
but with this much harder, cynical, and much more jaded kind of edge.
Yes.
One of the interesting things, or one of the nice things about the film also is, with the exception of a couple of villains, obviously the politician and the unit commander in Vietnam, and perhaps Bob Falfer in a minor way, but none of the characters are too awful. There's, everybody is pretty likable. Even, sort of the chaotic hippie band. There is a kind of a joy about that.
Everybody is likable, as you've said. Everybody, you're pulling for everybody.
Yeah.
You get 4 stories, 4 casts, and 4 people to really pull for. With a lot of movies, if something about the star you don't like, or the character, what he's doing, then that can wreck the movie for you. But we have a lot of people here to keep tabs on and to watch and to see them navigate. And each of them in their own way is trying to make their way. They are doing what we do every day, and we've all done. They are living life. They are navigating the highs and lows. They are asking themselves questions about themselves and about the world around them, the wider world, but also their spheres. John, of course, with the racing life and his desire to join the Hunt brothers team, and his being the champ. That world is very important to him. Now, we all think, what kind of future has John got as a race car driver? That doesn't really matter, because he's living his life and he's navigating. Terry, we've talked about him. He's trying to survive and not get killed. So he's a simple guy navigating this crazy circumstance. Candy Clark is the same. She loves this Flake, and she's trying to think, well, if it's not this Flake, Lance, her boyfriend, then who is it going to be? What is it going to be? Who am I? What am I doing? Part of the hippie thing was this flagellating existence where tomorrow didn't matter, and what are we going to do? So Candy is throwing her hands up in the air essentially every scene, like what is going on. So she's navigating and asking the questions. Of course, we've talked about Steve and Laurie battling marriage. Any married people are going to understand the challenges of marriage, and of the challenges of living in the same house with those 2 savage kids, George. So it's
Yes.
so realistic, and it's so slice of life. Because it's a slice of the 60s life, too, there's such a nostalgia built in. Whether you were there or not, man, you're looking at this olden days, like we say, and there's this nostalgia, there's a warm feeling, there's this knowing, it's like you're nodding at the screen every minute. You're like, I get it. I'm there with you. It's very relatable. It's very slice of life. And you're right. They're all likable people, and we're pulling for all of them. We're invested in all of their stories because they're just like us. They're just like our parents. We might, those of us of a certain age might see Steve and Laurie. That's my folks must have been like that. There's such a tenderness in that nostalgia that we all learned from Mad Men, that, nostalgia is so potent. And there's a melancholy there, but it's just a wonderful, from a character standpoint, it's just a joy to watch each of the segments. And each of the segments has, these half a dozen people that you're really invested in. So that is a big highlight of the film.
Even John Milner's sort of arch enemy at the track is not really that bad, and he comes good.
Milner in 64 is a triumph, really, because he is the man there. Sure, he's battling with the Hunt brothers, and he has a setback there. But, it's a nice touch, like you've said, that he joins with Roger Beckwith. The idea that Beckwith is a cool enough dude, he sees that it is us. It's not John and me separate. It is kind of us against the Hunt brothers, or us against the bigger companies. So John's in a jam. I can help him. We join together. And I love that. And I love that the director Norton had John, spoiler alert, beat the Hunt brothers car so handily, not close. John blew them away. So yes. John is a real triumph. And maybe we'll talk a little bit later about the sadness that adds to his story, the fact that he was killing it at the time in the film.
There's actually just a nice little moment quite early on in the film where Ron Howard and Steve and Laurie and Toad and Candy Clark. What was her name in the film, by the way? I can't remember.
Candy Clark played Debbie Dunham.
Debbie, yes, that's right. And, they all come to see John at the track. Terry says something quite gung-ho about going to Vietnam, and John Milner just very seriously implores him, just come back safely.
Toad says, I'm going to bring you back a VC flag or something, as if to say, I'm going to engage, I'm going to fight, and I'm going to rip this flag. And John is like, whoa, just navigate. just come back home. So that is poignant. And again, you're thinking this no doubt happened back in the day. Friends watched friends go off to war. There's such a poignancy in that little scene.
Yeah, especially because of the lottery nature of the draft.
Yes.
Some went and some didn't.
Yes.
So yeah, it's probably worth before we maybe have a brief talk briefly about the music, just about the poignancy of John Milner and knowing what's coming for him.
Well, John Milner, I love the fact it's such an odd way to go, pairing him with this exchange student from Iceland who doesn't speak any English.
Yeah.
And incidentally, Anna Bjorn, it was the actress's name. She was many things, the least of which was an actress. She was a model, graphic designer, yoga instructor, documentary filmmaker. Somehow, I haven't dug into this, but she provided the FBI with the information that led to the capture of Whitey Bulger, a criminal that was portrayed by Johnny Depp in Black Mass, the film from 2015.
Oh, that's interesting.
So she was a remarkable person, and she does really well in the film. She's very attractive, and she's very engaging. John, he's, like I said, he's a triumph. He is winning. The setback of the Hunt brothers, that's crushing. And there's a scene where he slumps back in his trailer and the radio, the beautiful old-fashioned portable transistor radio is at his ear. And I think it's Lenny Welch singing Since I Fell for You. And he's depressed about the Hunt brothers and Ava in the film. He's made a move on her and she's taken off and he's in a bummer now. And it's such a poignant scene because there's a bit of a depth for him there. He's in the depths. But killing the Hunt brothers' car so handily, being the champ, showing the Hunt brothers and everybody else what he can do is a serious triumph. He is so, even the local drivers at the track there, they know that John is working hard to get his car ready in time, and they're having their races and they're pretending that they're stalling and they're having problems. They're stalling for time for John. So there's this community coming together. And it's for John. John is still this leader guy, this major race car driver in the area. He is so elated after beating the Hunt brothers that, again, like all of us would do, he asks this Icelandic girl who doesn't speak any English to marry him.
Yes.
The lovely touch of having Oli, the night janitor guy, come in to translate is so sweet and it's so touching. So the screenplay is almost being very mean to us because John has triumphed. He is the winner. He's getting married. This lovely translation scene with Oli. And I'll get into it even though it hurts me. Knowing that John Milner dies carries on from the end of American Graffiti. You don't go into more American Graffiti thinking anything other than poor guy's going to die. So I mean, at the end of American Graffiti, you're so happy, what a wonderful film, but then that smile fades when you read about Toad, you read about John. That feeling, a jolt of reality feeling, is amplified in the sequel, and you sit down to start to watch more American Graffiti, knowing that death is coming. You're still able to smile and laugh and enjoy the film, but you know that tragedy is imminent. Which makes the film really almost kind of challenging because you know what's coming. But it's funny that it's still a wonderful film. It's a fun film to watch, and it's filled with vibrancy and with the joy of life. So there's a balance of radiance and darkness, which cannily echoes life in the 60s. I mean, we all reminisce about the good old days, but I always remember Billy Joel saying the good old days weren't always good. The 60s is a time of nostalgia for many of us. People my age, I'd love to go back there. Oh, the car I would have. The 60s has this big glow on it, but many of the survivors from that decade would probably concur that it was anything but easy sailing. You mentioned the lottery draft, this big dark cloud, this hammer hanging over you. You're waiting for it to fall. People were sent off to fight a war no one understood. Marriages were born in the glow of high school romance. They crumbled. Young people seeking an alternate lifestyle, hippie types, they were oppressed by the powers that were at the time. You know how hippies were looked down on. And you know what? Good friends were senselessly killed by drunk drivers. So more American Graffiti is just as much about the 60s as its predecessor was, but it deals more with the realities of that time. Maybe it's more about melancholy than it is about nostalgia. American Graffiti saved the realities of life for that final title card. More American Graffiti, those realities hang over the proceedings from the outset, but you watch it anyways, which I couldn't help but feel that's like life. you know tragedy and heartache are real and may come at any time, but you live anyways. Like you go ahead and you ask the Icelandic girl you just met to marry you. You go ahead and blow up the latrine so it rains down crap on. You go ahead and join the band. You go ahead and steal the bus to save your marriage. There's too much going on in this film to just discard it as this failed sequel. Like, it's so much about life in the 60s. The realities, there's less of a glow maybe, but it's more real. But there's this nostalgia, bittersweet things going on. There's so many layers of this onion. It's just real. It's poignant. It's the only word for it is it's poignant. And it really kind of starts and ends with John Milner. He's a champ and you're watching him be victorious over all these things, but you know what's coming, but you watch anyways. So that's part of what makes the film fascinating for me.
Just one of the final shots of John Milner's car just kind of disappearing into the kind of the misty twilight, and you sort of think, oh no, at that it's a particularly poignant moment.
Yeah.
But you also we talked when we were talking about American Graffiti, we talked about just how important the music was and how the music itself kind of became this character and this essential part of the movie. Looking at more American Graffiti, how do you see the use of the music in comparison?
I imagine if there was a brief checklist of things, we're going to make the sequel, what must be present in this sequel? Top of the list probably would have been music, wall-to-wall music. We all know George Lucas didn't invent it, but he basically proliferated this. We must have classic rock on the soundtrack. People love it. It means a lot to people. It comments on the action well. Load the film with music. And of course, that's what happened here. It's funny, when I really looked into the timeline and the soundtrack, they built on the success of the American Graffiti soundtrack in the years after 1973 by releasing 2 sequel soundtracks of more of that doo-wop and that era of music. So technically, the soundtrack of American Graffiti had 2 sequels before the film even had 1. So once again, more
Yes.
American Graffiti. George Lucas chose the bulk, if not all of the songs, and the songs are great. Sadly, the soundtrack as a whole lacks the charm of the first films. I guess it was easy with the first movie. Choose songs released by the summer of 62 and put them on the record. Now, before the Beatles came, we know, rock and roll had a certain sound, and the music released from 54 to 63 can all go together, no problem. It's wonderful. It's a perfect playlist of life, those years of popular music. Now, More American Graffiti spans 4 years, and not just 4 years, but the changes that took place in those particular 4 years in everything, politically and socially and culturally and definitely in music, were huge. And so you get a far larger variety of music on the soundtrack. For example, we hear my beloved Andy Williams singing Moon River, which is lovely, but it ends up on the same record as Cream doing Strange Brew. So that to me is sort of jarring. And, even maybe the placement, like Bobby Vinton singing Mr. Lonely during the Vietnam sequences just seems odd. I mean, you could say, well, the poor guy is sitting there in the mud, he's lonely. Yes, but it's such a gentle sort of romantic song. During Vietnam, it just didn't really work. So, I mean, it's folly to compare these 2 films, but I will again. In the first one, the music, and particularly our guy, Wolfman Jack, we'd be remiss to not mention that he is all over the sequel as well. The music in the first film, they did so well, and Walter Murch was the music editor, and he did so well with the sound of the film. The music, all the kids are listening to XCRB. Every car is tuned to it. Every store with the door cracked open, the radio is blasting XCRB. We're all listening, so it emanates naturally from many passing cars, and it's just the ambient sound is this wonderful old music. But in More American Graffiti, music just plays all the time. And I guess it's to be expected. We're in 4 different places, dealing with 4 different sets of people in 4 different years. I guess it's not going to work as well. The music just plays and we don't know from where, which somehow just seems disingenuous. And I did stumble on the record at a garage sale. Quick story. I went to the garage sale expecting records. There was none. There was another shopper at the sale that said, You want records? I have some in my trunk. So she opened her trunk and I was shopping and she had More American Graffiti. It was wonderful because the graphics are fantastic. The poster art, the cover of the record is awesome. Big double album. I was not going to not own it. So it's another double LP, and the Wolfman's appearances on it, those sound very contrived, and they don't lead into the songs very well. Like on the first film, you hear him talking over Buddy Holly, and it's very radio-like. But the second one is not like that. I remember distinctly even Wolfman is announcing the next song is by the Capitals. It's the Cool Jerk. And then there's a beat or two of silence, and then the song starts. So it's very not radio-like. So the soundtrack, I guess I'll have to say it's disappointing, but it's understandable why, because the film's spanning all these different places and vibes. But it's the variety of the music that was released between 64 and 67. By the end of 67, we were off and running into acid rock and all these crazy places. But, in 64, a crooner type sound was still viable. So it's a bit of a mashup, doesn't work quite as well. So I guess if I had final thoughts on More American Graffiti, I started at the outset talking about more. Us fans of film wanting more from a sequel, wanting more of characters and stories. So with More American Graffiti, you do get, the continuing adventures of Steve and Laurie. You get Milner and Toad and Debbie. So for fans of American Graffiti, this is a good thing. And it's great that this film was even made. The sequel, I'll admit, it's not spectacular, but neither is it the dud that many have claimed it is. I mean, the film may have done better if it had not been released against some stiff competition, if you look that up. Perhaps if it had been called something else, disassociating it from this beloved original, which might have made it a whole different thing from a business standpoint. Who knows about green lighting such a project, whatever. It does also lack the connected tightness of the first film. Obviously, I think because it spans years, so therefore it feels more sprawling and a little less intimate certainly. With the first film, you're in the back seat with the gang, you're standing on the sidewalk, and there's this closeness.
You're right there when Mackenzie Phillips gets in the face with a water
with the balloon in the face.
Just this lovely moment, yes.
That's right. You're just sitting on his fender there watching it all. So this is a more sprawling, of course. It cannot be as intimate. So most of the negativity, I would say, comes from the fact that it is a sequel to a beloved film, and that always is going to get looked at a bit askance. But if you can get past that, there is lots to enjoy in More American Graffiti.
Okay, so Gary, you've written a great series of articles on American Graffiti. There's a dedicated article to More American Graffiti, which you wrote since we recorded our previous segment. So on this episode's webpage at DEC4podcast.com, we're going to link to all of those articles and just use that as a bit of a directory to where to find lots more. And after we've talked about American International Pictures in our little end segment after the credits, we're just going to replay the little piece that you recorded for us for American Graffiti's 50th anniversary and what it means for you and for your family. So that'll be coming up after the credits, right at the very end. Gary, can you introduce us to American International Pictures?
Yes, George, I can, and I would be happy to. Sam Arkoff and James Nicholson actually were buddies and partners, and they started things off. Now, Arkoff, he married a Canadian, which makes him brilliant.
Yeah, well, of course.
And the two set up housekeeping in Los Angeles, and Sam was studying law. He was working as a lawyer whose job it was to work for the Hollywood studios to save pictures that were doomed by their bloated budgets. Fascinating for a couple of reasons. First of all, such a job existed back then. And secondly, if you know anything about American International Pictures, you can easily see that this is the origin story of the way they did business, but we'll continue on from the beginning. So he came familiar with the business end of filmmaking, and it was his job to go to film sets, to hang out there, and to really study. I mean, he was getting paid to really study and to see what was going on, what the budgets were like, how much money was being spent on what. That's key. So I guess the studios would be sweating and they'd be hemorrhaging money and films would be running long and over budget and they would call a lawyer type like Sam in. So he saw extravagant expenditures firsthand. And it didn't take him long really to figure to himself, I can do this better than these clowns. Look at how even their dedicated bean counters couldn't get this right. The film is over budget and they have to call me in. I think I should go into the movie business, but he was concerned about his ability to support his family. Like so many of us, we have a dream, something we want to do, but in order to do that, we have to be ready for this, and that. And all those things sometimes can prove too daunting. So that was the case with Arkoff. And in 1952, though, he got a headache. And his headache quickly led to a coma and a cerebral hemorrhage. So the man almost died, but he did not. And when he recovered, he himself has talked about his new perspective, and his wife, being a good Canadian woman, was encouraging to him and strong for him and said, you know what, if this is what you want to do, then do it. So with his buddy Nicholson, James Nicholson, they created, first it was called American Releasing Corporation. And it was really the worst time in history to start a new movie studio or a movie distribution company because the business was changing. Studios were in trouble because of the threat of television. So it was a bad time to do such a thing, but he did so. And he and Nicholson got together. And what they ended up doing, George, with American International was they created their own brand, basically their own genre almost they created, and their own version and method of filmmaking that differed greatly from the conglomerates in Hollywood. They took a left turn, they did a little bit of a sidebar, they went off the beaten track and created a historical film entity.
Actually, there's an interesting article in Hollywood Reporter, which we'll put a link on the webpage, and it was talking about the United States versus Paramount antitrust decision in 1948. This forced the studios to divest themselves of their theatres, which meant that they didn't have a guaranteed market now for all of their output. As early as 1948, New York Times was reporting about grim problems for Hollywood, which they put down to soaring costs, declining revenue, particularly internationally. And you alluded to television, and of course there were some other factors too. American International Pictures kind of rose out of these ashes, didn't it? And in fact, in your review of Sam Arkoff's book, Flying Through Hollywood by the Seat of My Pants, you quote his desire to actually create a new market, create essentially a teenage market for movies.
Well, yes, exactly. And anybody like yourself and I, George, who's drilled down into Elvis Presley's history in the 50s and the emerging rock and roll scene in the mid to late 50s, we've read many times about the teenager, how the teenager began to enter the workforce and part-time jobs, and they had disposable income. They were becoming upwardly mobile, and they were spending their money. And business types, ad executives, they began to understand this, and we saw a bit of a shift in aiming things towards the teenager. They were going to spend their dollars, and this is maybe where, if you were to study, demographics, the history of demographics, different age groups, and how they spent their money, what they went to the theater to see, what music they spent their money on. This is all a part of that. And Arkoff was savvy enough that he came up with the idea of making films specifically aimed at a demographic that he thought maybe the big studios had neglected somewhat, which was the teenager. And through the 50s and into the 60s, to think about films that would draw teenagers in, well, I feel like it starts and in the middle and it ends with American International. The films they made were just perfect for the kids because production value is not so hot. So again, he knew what not to spend money on. Don't mess with this, don't mess with that. Spend the money wisely and pop. Give the kids what they want, whether it's hot rods or girls or delinquency, whatever. So they definitely tapped into that demographic, the teenager in the mid to late 50s.
And he had very little or no tolerance at all for troublesome stars and big budgets, really, did he?
No, he didn't. And like I say, I think he's quoted in his book as talking about what you spend the money on is so important, and a big name simply was not important to him. He does talk about in his book briefly the few times he did hire a big star. You know, a lot of times stars later in their careers would take a paycheck by showing up in some crazy film, whether out of necessity for money or just because they wanted to keep work. I remember Joseph Cotton saying, yeah, I need to work. I need to be doing something. So he made some crazy movies. But yeah, he talks about working with Shelley Winters and Bette Davis in the late 60s, for example. And the hardest time he had on a film set making a film was dealing with these stars. So that was validation for him because he was probably thinking to himself, I was right then. Never mind bringing in the big names, throw a bunch of kids in the film. And the audience, the kids in the audience were thinking, this is not some famous star that I connect with this role, with that movie. I have no point of reference for that actor. He's just a kid. Maybe he's like me. Maybe he's a kid down the street. So they connect with these hot rod movies, for example, more easily because it's a fresh face. And I still love that, a cast of unknowns. I find it easier to dial into the story. So definitely the money. It's hard to say what money was spent at all when you look at some of these American International pictures, but it definitely was not on big names.
Can you tell us a little bit about Roger Corman and how his legacy perhaps is far greater than the movies that he directed or produced?
Well, I'm glad you asked me because Roger Corman, the late, he lasted so long and we just lost him recently, but AIP's story basically starts with Roger Corman. The studio gave him his start when they agreed to distribute. You see, he was really an independent filmmaker. He made the films himself, and AIP and Arkoff and Nicholson came in to distribute the films. And in 1955, it was The Fast and the Furious, which became AIP's first release. So Corman had a 3-picture deal with them, and The Fast and the Furious was the first, and there was others, or there was a Western in there. Anyways, there was 3 films that he made. He became an entity unto himself, and I guess he was a lot like Arkoff. He was a lot like AIP, really. He worked the same way, and so they were hand in glove, the two entities. And the story, if you look it up, Roger Corman, who he worked with, who he gave their starts to, the list is just remarkable. So the list is rivaled only really by American International. The two of them just tapped into this burgeoning pool of actors and actresses and filmmakers that were emerging in the 50s and 60s. And it's almost, in a way, George, like writing a book nowadays. With self-publishing, it's so much easier, less hoops, less publishing houses to deal with. Back in the day, young guy wants to make a movie, what, like Paramount or Columbia is going to give him a break? Unlikely. But then here's a guy like Sam Arkoff and AIP, they need product. So if you're a young guy who's going to make some movies, we will throw some money at it. We will invest in that. We will either invest in the film and produce it and make it with you, or we'll distribute what you got. So it begins with Roger Corman, but it certainly didn't end there. It took off from there, and Corman and AIP gave a lot of people their start. So that is where it begins, though.
Ron Howard speaks very fondly of Roger Corman, in fact referred to Roger Corman University, essentially, as this unofficial sort of training ground for young directors and filmmakers.
Let's get into it. Francis Ford Coppola's first feature, Dementia 13, 1963. AIP financed it. It didn't cost them much, less than $50,000. Francis Ford Coppola, okay? Woody Allen directed his first film. It's an interesting story. Arkoff and Nicholson had agreed to distribute a Japanese spy film that was in production, but the finished product was deemed unreleasable. I love that term. Could mean so many things. We cannot release this. I know a lot of work's gone in, a lot of money's gone in, but we cannot release it.
Yes.
So they actually gave the film to Woody Allen to play with, like it was some sort of a toy. And he removed and replaced all the dialogue and changed it from a spy film to a comedy and called it What's Up, Tiger Lily. So that was early days for Woody Allen. And it's an interesting it almost encapsulates AIP's business model, all in the story of that one filmmaker. My man, John Milius, directed his first film for AIP, Dillinger, in 1973 with Warren Oates. Canadian Ivan Reitman directed Cannibal Girls in 1973. They made it for less than $100,000. David Cronenberg another Canadian. Shivers, a really creepy film shot in Montreal in 1975. Martin Scorsese. I mean, think about the names we're throwing out here. Directed his first major commercial film for Arkoff and Nicholson, 1972's Boxcar Bertha. And, even Marty has said that his very next film, Mean Streets, wouldn't have been the movie it was without his experience at AIP. You think about it. These guys, how else are they going to get their feet wet? How else are they going to experience big-time filmmaking? Arkoff and Nicholson say, hey, you know what? Part of it was belief in the filmmaker, sure. But let's be honest, part of it was just, you know what? This is our business. Here's a few $100,000 or even $50,000. Go and make your film and we'll see what happens. And it just so happens that because of that incubator and the atmosphere that they created for these filmmakers to just go ahead and make their film led to remarkable careers. Brian De Palma worked early in his career for AIP and made one of his first horror films for the studio, Sisters, in 1972, with my girl Margot Kidder. Peter Bogdanovich, who is a story unto himself, he's been in cahoots with just about every major filmmaker in history. He had a good friendship with Roger Corman, and he did odd jobs for AIP just around the lot before he broke out as director. So, I mean, that's just the filmmakers. The actors, though, the actors is a long list, too. They either made their first film or they had a breakout role that led to their stardom. Like sometimes you have to be seen, right? Sometimes the actor has to show up in something interesting and then he takes off. We got names like Charles Bronson, Mel Gibson, Nick Nolte, Don Johnson, Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, Peter Fonda, Michael Landon, Melanie Griffith, Bruce Dern, Richard Pryor, Cher, Chuck Norris, Tom Laughlin, my man, Billy Jack, Mike Connors, Sally Kellerman, Susan Sarandon, Diane Ladd. So it's not the definitive list of major actors of the 70s, but I mean, it's close. So it was really an incubator, and so many of the filmmakers that redefined things in the 70s, really, the mavericks that changed not only the studio system, but the way films were made. I mean, even before that lean and mean, post-Chinatown, New Hollywood thing, where did those guys get it? I mean, Lucas and the boy, a lot of them got it from UCLA, but a lot of them got their feet wet at AIP, definitely.
And can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, one of their more memorable franchises, the Beach Party movies?
Oh, yes. I can talk about the Beach Party movies. I love them. And I will defend them as, well, you know what? Necessary entertainment, necessary to the enjoyment of life. They had a favorite screenwriter at AIP, Arkoff's Canadian brother-in-law, Lou Rusoff. Lou Rusoff would write films for them. He eventually became a producer there as well. The brother of Arkoff's wife. So they were Winnipeg types, I think. They were out west, and he came to LA for the brutal task of researching kids at the beach. Hanging out at the beach in the sun, George, the poor guy, he would listen to the kids, watch what they would do, then he would get ideas from that. So he came up with Beach Party in 1963 was the first. Now, as everybody knows, it wasn't the first real beach party movie. That was, of course, Gidget in 59. But that was a subgenre, the beach party movie, that AIP took off and they made it their own. And so Arkoff, in his book, he talks about battling with Walt Disney about the way Annette Funicello was depicted in the beach party movies. And he doesn't, for my own liking, in his book, dive deeply enough for me into the beach party movies. But he does talk about, $300 to $400, $500,000 they would put into these films. And the most unlikely West Coast beach couple in Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. Somehow they just vaulted. I guess, Frankie had his singing career that was doing well, and Annette, was a Mouseketeer and very popular. So I understand the casting there. But those movies, and if you look into it, it wasn't like a decade's worth of films. They struck while the iron was hot, and there was 3 or 4 years of increasingly goofy beach party movies. But the kids out west, a lot of them loved them because, they would hit the beach too, and it was kind of kicks. Of course, real surfers hated them, but that's another story. But even, the kid in Kansas City or the kid, sitting in South Dakota or somewhere would really latch on to these films just like they would to the Beach Boys, for example. And so they sold a lot of tickets for the Beach Party movies, and they did really well as well. And, a lot of actors and actresses got a lot of exposure in those films. Now, not a lot of them really went on to, much of consequence, but that was their thing. And they've been able to, dine out on that for years and years afterwards. So they were fun films, and they were just one little pocket of the entertainment that American International provided in the early 60s.
I wonder about looking back on these films now, and I'm kind of mindful of people like David Putnam and Alan Parker, this generation of filmmakers who have always said that cinema is a collective experience. To appreciate a film, you need to be in a cinema, you need to have people around you feed off their reactions and their emotions, and then it's a nice social thing afterwards in the car park or the restaurant, wherever, when you're talking about the film. And I wonder if the generations like us who have really only seen these films at home, whether it's streaming or DVD, late night movies, whatever, I wonder if we can never appreciate these films or some of the Elvis films or movies of this nature without seeing them at a cinema.
Well, I think you'd have to admit and acknowledge that something has been lost, certainly. I mean, you could apply that phrase to many things nowadays. Certainly the theater-going experience, the film consumption experience. Now, I don't want to complain too much because, George, I love it. I always call it basement camping. Like, I like the comfort of my home. And late at night, George, I've had many experiences, wonderful, watching a film and communing with the film and doing my own thing. But that is sort of a different thing. And back in that day, I mean, you couldn't just bring it up on a device in your home. It's even often you hear so much about the first time a film was shown on television and, The Late Show. And even that was a really big experience and a novel thing when a film was showed on television. So, 90% of the chances you had to view a film would be to go to the theater. And I can just imagine, I mean, particularly maybe at a drive-in too, where there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of milling about, there's the concession stand, there's socializing, there's kicks, and in the theater, of course, meeting at the theater, outside, like the social collective experience. There's got to be a lot to be said for that, because I even recall a few times when I was a teenager in my early 20s that my friends and I would get together to go see a film, and there was a real, a group thing for that. It was a fun thing where, you would talk a little bit previous to what you've heard about the film or what you're anticipating. And then, of course, the experience in the theater with the group and everybody responding and laughing and of course, asking, who's that? What have I seen him in? And this group experience of viewing it together. And like you say, afterwards, the discussion where so often afterwards now, we just go on to Letterboxd and shoot a review, or we go on somewhere and just tweet out a quick, and that's a different thing. And you make a good point about we have certainly missed out on something. I think one of the many things that is gone, never to really return in the same way, would be that collective experience. I mean, you can imagine something goofy like the Beach Party movies, or anything with a Raquel Welch or a Bridget Bardot, where the boys afterwards would be just besides themselves, thinking about, I wish that was me, or that experience, or could you imagine being this guy or that guy? And so often too, you often hear stories about, I saw that movie and it changed my life. It made me think, maybe I should buy a motorcycle and take off. And my friends and I, every year we would get together, things come out of that collective experience, things that go on down through the years. So definitely I would think it's a different world now. I mean, it goes without saying, but that'll be one of the many things that is lost, that collective viewing experience. You make a good point.
Returning very briefly to the state of the studio system, there's a great interview with Betty Comden and Adolph Green, who were writers for the Arthur Freed unit in the golden age of the MGM musical. And in this interview, they talked about, it was actually for a documentary on Arthur Freed, and in this interview, they talked about the fact that each time they had a premiere, it would be this huge event, Radio City Music Hall or wherever, saturation press coverage, huge gala event parties. It would be massive. And In 1955, they did a film with Gene Kelly called It's Always Fair Weather. And they recalled opening the trade papers, opening in drive-ins across the country. And that was the signal to them that that was it. It was kind of over. Once again, this transition from the market that the major studios knew to this new era that Sam Arkoff was very keen to, create and build.
Well, sure, and he exploited that. I mean, you could even, to coin a phrase, it went from the floodlights to the headlights.
Yes.
Instead of the big premiere, you see the newsreels where the guys get out of the cars and people are freaking out and they're shaking hands and the flash bulbs are going, tuxedos and whatnot. But then a guy like Arkoff, AIP turned a lot of what they call last run theaters that carried a lot of whatever B product, or they were down the street as opposed to on the main drag, last run theaters and drive-ins into places where attractive new product was placed. I mean, like I said before, they created this market. The kids want to go to the drive-in. The kids want to go, have one of their places. Maybe they're even turning away from their folks and the way the things were done in the old days. So as you've said, new product, not just a last run film, was being shown in these places. Drive-ins especially was a big deal, and AIP definitely did that. They put their brand new film, it premiered in the what were formerly called B houses and the drive-ins, but that was and the shifting sands. You can chart the graph of the timeline of Hollywood, how things went up and down and where they changed and what caused the changes. And definitely Arkoff was at the vanguard of this particular change. And a harder, edgier film, not just the films themselves, but where they were premiered and where they were played.
And I mean, he was quite clear that he was not into the family movie, wasn't he? He was into his game was to separate the teenagers from the parents, get the teenagers out to the cinema.
Exactly. I mean, sometimes with the adult dramas, the melodramas in the 50s, they would make it seem more titillating by saying, for adult viewers only, whatever. This was kind of the opposite. We're obviously making this for the teenagers, for your sons and daughters. The good example is the horror films they made. I mean, Arkoff says flat out, like, we would make a poster. We would have a title. We would have a title and a poster and put it up in the theater. And then we'd run whatever other film is playing there and we'd watch the kids. If they're gathered around this poster with this horrible monster, or if it was a bathing beauty or some other sort of appealing thing, motorcycle guys, how do the kids respond? And if the general vibe was, I can't wait to see this film, well then, George, they would have to go ahead and make the film to actually go with the poster. The taglines, the promo, the poster would come first, but that was how we would never do that, MGM or whatever, but this was how they thought, let's test it first. Why make the picture if the public wasn't likely to buy it? Arkoff says in his book. So we test drive it first. And the horror films, I mean, no parent back in the day was interested in the beast with a million eyes or whatever. And so often they would have this horrible beast on the poster and they'd call it, the beast from whatever. And it was a horrible thing that you maybe even never saw this creature in the film. They alluded to it. The shadow was horrific. And of course, they had a guy in a costume or whatever. So it was low budget, but the kids were eating it up. And I think maybe most of it was because, dang, this is for me. This is my film. That was for me tonight. That double feature, oh boy, we're at the soda shop afterwards and we're laughing. This is mine. I can, just like Elvis Presley is mine, I can grab this and it's mine. And they might have asked, well, what did you think of the film? Well, it was lousy, but I mean, what kicks, like I love what Tarantino says, we didn't really enjoy the film. We enjoyed watching it. That was the fun thing. So Arkoff said, you know what, there's kids out there. We'll make, let's see how biker movies do. We'll make biker movies. And that became a whole thing. Biker movies, The Wild Angels made like $10 million eventually. Counterculture films like Wild in the Streets from '68, which enraged Chicago's Mayor Daley, who spoke out against it. The Billy Jack character, there's a long story. I've written an article at my site. It's a long story, but Tom Laughlin with the boys and tried to get Billy Jack. I mean, Billy Jack is a major money earner over the years. And it was kind of a crazy very counterculture film that was geared at kids. Arkoff in his book talks about Easy Rider. The deals fell through and they didn't have anything to do with that. But Sonny Bono writes a film and puts Cher in it, Chastity, 1969. So all of these little, I neglected to mention the Sword and Sandal movies that were popular. And they did a lot of distribution work in Europe and bought a lot of European films. And so that sort of film was big over there. And Corman's Edgar Allan Poe horror films. So all of them, well, not all of them, but a lot of them had this bright Technicolor look, and they were very unsettling and horrific, and there might be a monster poking out, or, the biker hits the streets and the cops don't understand him. I mean, these are all geared right for the kids, and they just took that to their bosom, and they said, this is for me. So, I mean, not all American International, but I mean, American International Pictures has become synonymous with that whole type of film, that whole genre, and this whole, maybe it was a 15, 20-year run where you can almost assume that type of picture, later on it was blaxploitation films, martial arts movies, it was trucker CB movie, George, Breaker 19, Walking Tall, these revenge type movies. So it was a real definite type, American International. I hate to say genre because they worked in a bunch of different genres, but American International is really filmmaking unto itself.
One thing I did find out actually by sheer accident was, it's interesting that it wasn't all werewolves, beach parties and bikers. They picked up distribution for a British Great War court-martial drama called King and Country for a re-release in 1966 with Dirk Bogarde, Tom Courtenay and Leo McKern. Quite an interesting addition to their filmography. Interestingly directed by Joseph Losey, who was in exile, essentially having been named in the House Un-American Activities Committee. So it's interesting that I guess their filmography did transcend what we might stereotypically think of their output.
Well, definitely. And not only, domestic film, but they had their hand in films internationally. I mentioned Europe and working with directors like Mario Bava on his early films and the Sword and Sandal thing. And so often when I would dive into AIP to learn and I want to see their films, they are considered American International Pictures, mostly through the distribution angle. And so that was another side. If you read Arkoff's story, the whole business end would be fascinating for somebody who's, business minded. And I've run into a lot of people who were like this. They were actors for a little while, middling career, and then they saw a chance to work overseas and to distribute films, whether it's Philippines or definitely Europe and all through Italy. You mentioned England. So another part of AIP story absolutely is films that the kids wouldn't even have heard of because they weren't for them necessarily. They were for international kids. So yeah, they were smart enough to see that there was money to be made. And in Arkoff's book, I remember whole sequences talking about the dubbing and the craziness that would go on and how they would almost alter a film completely by changing what the person said. And depending on what market it was going into, well, you can't say that in Egypt, or you got to phrase it a certain way in France or whatever. So there was that whole thing internationally that is definitely a part of their story. You make a good point.
And it's interesting also now, we kind of take for granted that you post something online and there it is for everybody. The logistics of doing this in those days, physically shipping out reels of film and
big canisters and big crates.
And the advertising, the billboards, the cinemas, like just the logistics of doing this in a non-digital world is increasingly hard to comprehend how they did it.
Maybe we can't even, understand exactly. Even if it's explained to us, we still don't get it. Because, I mean, even us talking over the internet or texting or calling, it so easy and so fast, and it really is a cliche, but it's the world is smaller now because of how we're able to do this and travel times. But they were doing all this, think about it, man, telephones and long distance and transatlantic and mail, like actual mail, and shipping things and making decisions fast. Could you get a hold of the director or the distributor or the producer right away? No, you had to track them down all over the place. So really this willy-nilly maverick way of making films, it's fascinating, and they don't maybe get enough credit because, like everything else, everything is kind of easier nowadays. You can shoot a movie on your phone, upload, done, next. those guys were killing themselves, and to venture overseas, we just say, oh, then they worked overseas, and then we move on. But think about that back then. To say, what do you mean you're going to thousands of miles away on a different continent? Oh, yeah, we can do this and do that. So they're remarkable people that got this done, and they need credit for that, for sure, absolutely, because it was a lot of heavy lifting back then.
So, Gary, nothing lasts forever. What was the fate in the ensuing years for Sam Arkoff and American International?
Well, I was fascinated to learn that there was a few genuine blockbusters that American International put out, more so in the later 70s. I had grown up knowing about the Amityville Horror, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder, another Canadian. Finally, Sam thought to himself, well, put out some money, buy the option, and maybe we can make a film here, and we could set up camp for a while there with just Amityville alone. I mean, what's come from that film? I mean, a lot of sequels, remakes, and a lot of this whole universe from the one film. Also in 79, Love at First Bite, a little bit of a comedic look at the Dracula story with George Hamilton. Mad Max in 79, they put their money in and helped a lot with distribution and production there. And one of my favorites, Brian De Palma's Dressed to Kill from 1980, was also. So there was a couple-year run there where, they got to have a real shine on them. Then Arkoff, I had read in his book, he talked about, he was canny enough to see, many things throughout his 20 years at the helm of AIP, and he saw things come and go, and he rode the tides, and he might have seen at the dawn of the 80s that things were changing, and maybe he was getting to be a certain age at that point. I'm not sure about his health exactly. You never see the guy without a big stogie in his mouth, so he might have been counting, thinking to himself, well, maybe it's time. So he did eventually sell American National to Filmways. And I read briefly, I didn't dig in too much to Filmways, but I mean, think about these crazy things that happen in the history of entertainment. Filmways, the execs, the buyers, the owners, whatever, the presidents must have known the type of film that AIP made and had made for years and years. But as soon as they bought it, they thought they were going to just change it drastically, make it into something that it wasn't. Arkoff was going to stay on under this new regime, but inside of 5 months, he saw the writing on the wall, so he backed right up. And George, it was not even 2 years that Filmways filed for bankruptcy. And talk about this colossal failure. The people that were in charge, the people that were put in charge, the people that just did not make this work and failed miserably, and bankruptcy. And Orion Pictures bought it. There was an exhibit of their films, and they were, praised isn't the right word. They were really signified as being, a landmark achievement in the history of film. I'll quote from presentation here at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Not only are American International's films rich in their depiction of our culture, but indeed they have played not an insignificant part in it. If their films helped establish filmmaking trends by anticipating public interest, they also addressed something familiar in their audiences. The young filmmakers attracted to AIP were already moving to the beat of a changing America. So, George, when I would read about the advertising business in the 60s, I was fascinated to learn that ad execs would not always see a trend happening and then depict it in their ads. They would create ads that would spark these trends in culture, which is fascinating. Similarly here, they played a significant part in our culture. So perhaps it was, Arkoff and AIP who said, we're going to make a such and such film and unleash it on the public. And if it catches fire, we're going to make 15 more. And this is going to be part of people's upbringing, part of their youth, part of their lives, and part of their pursuits in life. I always think about motorcycle guys who always, oh man, I saw this film and I just had to have a bike and now I've been riding for 50 years. These films could change people's lives or definitely instill in them dreams, things I want to do. Maybe even if it's a goofy kid in Kansas who wants to move to Los Angeles because he's seen Muscle Beach Party. It could be anything. It could be, I could make a film like that. Look at this. I just saw, Dr. Zhivago and it's amazing, but here is Bucket of Blood, and I can do that. So maybe it sparked people to go out and do it because it wasn't so highfalutin anymore. It wasn't so totally above our heads. So Arkoff and AIP entwine themselves into culture, and so they become kind of more than films, and that's a significance that, you know, I like to trumpet on my site, and I like to talk about with you, because this is not a small thing. This is not just a movie studio. This is a huge part of the fabric of 20th century culture.
Well, Gary, thank you for sharing your knowledge of American International Pictures. Now, there's a great collection of articles on your site. Now, we've created a bit of a directory on this episode's webpage to some of your related writing on American International Pictures and Hollywood in that era. That's thoroughly recommended. And we're very much looking forward to doing this again.
Yes, well, this was enjoyable for me because American International is near and dear to my heart, because, you know, that level of filmmaking, I don't know, I just really love that sort of unpretentious, sort of just give the kids what they want, sort of fun film that's just enjoyable to watch. So I'm so happy to talk about it, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gary. And please stick around after the credits, because we just replay what Gary recorded for us for the 50th anniversary of American Graffiti in 2023. I guess an example of how your work has perhaps reached the world that you are writing about, by virtue of an article that you wrote on Donna Loren, you were invited to appear on her podcast. Now, she was, I guess, what we might say now as a brand ambassador for Dr. Pepper, and she was in the Beach Party movies and a singer. So did you get any particular insight or, I guess, any feeling for the pictures through your conversation with Donna Loren?
Well, I think what I got was kind of what I expected to get, in that so many of these people that were in these films, Donna was a very interesting an example, because yes, she was in the films, but I remember asking her, did she think that her real career growth might have been sort of stunted by her connection as the Dr. Pepper girl, or, you know, as the girl who sang in the Beach Party movies? And she thought that maybe there was a bit attached to her because of that. But you mentioned my subjects, the people I talk about, you know, so often, not so often, but it has happened where, you know, people have reached out to me, whether it's the descendants of these people, because this is, you know, filmmaking. This is Hollywood filmmaking. This is recording artists. These are people who did stuff, but there's, you know, different levels to doing things. I mean, there's A-list, a B-list, and you know, maybe lower down the alphabet. But these people, the sense I got was that, I hate to call them fans, but there are still people like us out there who have a real deep feeling for these actors and singers. And it's so easy to be a John Wayne guy and to love John Wayne, and to Cary Grant, I have to see all his films, but there's such a massiveness to those actors that I feel like it's a little bit of something different when you talk about somebody that huge. But the lower level people, and a lot of them are not afraid to like your tweet or to comment on your post, or to come out and say, well, you know, thank you, and oh no, actually it was this, or instead it was that, because they're ready to talk about that, because they have a relationship with us too. They're not so huge that, you know, they can't come down and talk to us peasant types. So there's different levels to it, and Donna's a good example of somebody who's ready to engage with you because she doesn't see any reason not to, because we had a real relationship with these people, and they mean a lot to us. And maybe the fact that they're not so huge, we can feel a more possession over these people. They are ours. I've never heard of that film. Well, that's good, because it's still mine then, you know, like I love this actor, I love this singer, I love this movie, and they still are of a size where they'll fit in your pocket, you know, and go with you through life, and they're yours. So there's something to be said for this level of entertainment. Now, I don't want it to sound like the films are any less, or the singers are any lesser. Sure, they were not as popular and didn't move as many units, but it doesn't affect our affection for them. So there's still a real glow on people like Donna Loren and others that made films with her and operated in that time period.
I think too, also in terms of what you write, which I've said previously, I mean, people appreciate not only for its sincerity, but also for the amount of work that you put in to make it accurate. And I think that's increasingly more important now when our social media feeds are just full of AI-generated rubbish about various people and rehashed stuff. And I think work like yours, where it is, you do it and you research it and it's all you, and with that sincerity and authenticity, I think that's going to be more appreciated as people try to navigate this mess that we've got on social media and online.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I like to think that is kind of a hallmark, the honesty, because so often I will say, you know what, like this movie, it's not good, but you know what? I love it, and here's why. And the idea that it doesn't have to be good, the idea that flaws are okay, and AI imagery, for example, actually is a little bit skin crawly, creepy, you can spot the image right off the bat. You see so many in, for example, Facebook groups devoted to classic film, and somebody will share a picture and inevitably somebody will spot it and there'll be an outrage. Sharon Tate, for example, was so gorgeous on her own with no makeup. Why would you bother AIing her? Like, why would you bother?
I know, exactly.
Because we love the things mostly because of their age. So AI modernizes everything and makes things new. So that is contrary to what we're doing. And on my site, I like to share what I've found or what I know. And if I haven't found corroborating evidence or anything, sometimes I'll like to put it in there still to say, let's discuss this. What do you think? Did that really happen or didn't it? I couldn't find any, third-party corroboration or whatever. I got it from one source, and oftentimes I'll be looking at a paragraph and then thinking, I'm not really sure if that's accurate, but you know what? Let it go. Worst case scenario is somebody engages with me. And that's what even if they're saying, buddy, you got that wrong, I'm like, great, tell me, how did I get it wrong? And how do you know that the other is right? And let's talk about this, because it's all a conversation. And I like to talk about things that not everybody else is talking about, and the people that have been maybe forgotten. And, I always think, should I write about this person or this movie or this album? And my question is it cool? And if it's cool, then what's cool about it, and do people need to know about it? And the articles just say they're based on, here's what's cool about this. You should really know about this. I half joke, I love you guys so much. You deserve to hear about so-and-so, so I have to write. So yeah. I'm glad that my site comes across that way, because I want it to be a bastion of just, genuine discussion and love and honesty. Like, what's the problem with saying, no, that song is terrible, I can't stand that, but we love it because it was so-and-so and we love him or her. And the discussion needs to go on, George, and it's going to be guys like you and I that continue to dig into the crevices and to travel on the back streets and find the stuff that needs to live on, even if this is just a big oral history exercise where we need to share these things with you. American International is a great example of that.
You can get in touch with us at distributor.com or leave a comment or question on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, or our social media. Follow Gary Wells at soulrideblog.com, your home for vintage leisure, and Oliver Crocker at devonfirebooks.com, and at the Bill Podcast on Patreon or your preferred platform. Check out some great travel videos and tips from Steve Collins on his YouTube channel, Steve Collins Traveller, formerly Please Tell Me Where to Go. Our original instrumental theme and mellow sounds are thanks to Detlef Wolf and hardworking Gainesville, Europe's top Tom Petty tribute band out of Germany. Find them at gainesville-band.com. We take some external guidance on the fair use of potentially copyrighted material for commentary and critique. Details at our website. The DEC4 podcast is available under Creative Commons. This has been George Fairbrother. Thank you for listening.
Ever since I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019, I have made it a point each year to explore films from 50 years ago. That year of 2019, I made a list of films made in 1969 and tried to watch as many as I could. I'm excited that this year, 2023, will mark the 50th anniversary of George Lucas's American Graffiti. For the full story of the impact of this film on my life, be sure to head to soulrideblog.com to read all 4 parts of my review. In a nutshell, my stepfather, who was 16 in 1962, introduced me to the film, suggesting that I would not really understand life until I had seen it. It took a while, but American Graffiti slowly grew on me. It was when I hit a certain age that I fully understood its significance, both as an iconic piece of filmmaking history, but also as a significant document of an era and of a time in one's own life. I began to watch it every Labor Day weekend, first by myself and later with my 2 sons. The details of when the film takes place I have talked about in my articles, but basically it depicts a time when the freedom of summer is over and the seriousness of school and life once again call us to our responsibilities. Labor Day represents a pivot point in our year, and Lucas's film takes this a step further. American Graffiti is about a few things, but the theme that permeates every minute of screen time is transition. Not only are these kids dealing with going out into the world and leaving their hometown, but very soon all of American culture would face a substantial pivot point. One felt through many areas of life. I always like to augment my movie watching experience with more. I want to read about a film, watch its sequel, and listen to its soundtrack. And I do love a novelization of a film I enjoy. Sometimes, though, an author may play a little fast and loose. The Complete American Graffiti, the novel, I miraculously found at a thrift store many years ago. It attempts to present the stories of both American Graffiti and its sequel, More American Graffiti, in book form. While it's fun to take the movie with you in this way, be warned you may also have to put up with some odd literary choices. Case in point is the fateful night that John Milner went on to meet Buddy Holly. The author of the novelization puts forth the idea that the car that struck and killed John was the white 1956 Thunderbird driven by the blonde, Sherry. Beside her was her date, Officer Holstein, and in the back seat were Bob Falfa and his date, Buddha, the car hop. Silly, but heck, the film is a comedy after all. My boys and I have gotten plenty of laughs from American Graffiti, even after the movie is ended. In-jokes between us include using the phrase, "I'm a ready Teddy," and repeating Toad's complaint, "My leg, my leg." And I can always get a laugh out of my stepfather by saying, "Like every other guy in town, you've got the same secret dream. You want to be a pharaoh." Or, "Oh, no thanks, I'm waiting for a double chubby chuck." This is that kind of film. I guess not everyone loves this film, though, today or when it came out. Famously, the normally savvy film critic Pauline Kael seemed to miss the point completely. She actually said, there is nothing to back up the style of the film. I don't know, I babbled on for 4 articles about the many wonderful things backing up the style, and she said it was draggy? Makes me wonder if Ms. Kael was ever a teenager. One autumn, after my usual Labor Day viewing of American Graffiti, I bought and read the autobiography of Wolfman Jack, who features so prominently in Lucas's memories and his film. Early on in Wolf's book, I could tell that he was presenting his life story in a very conversational way. He definitely wrote the way he spoke. And that was great. It makes for a very casual and easy read. I was excited to get to the American Graffiti part of the book, and when I did, I was not disappointed. Very noticeable was the change in tone once Wolf started talking about his time making the film. He gets very reverent. It was great to read that perhaps Wolfman Jack feels towards the movie the way many of us do. More practically, I was fascinated to learn that George Lucas paid Wolfman Jack for his appearance in the film by giving him a very small share of the profits, a minuscule share that resulted in a substantial income for the Wolfman that lasted until the day he sadly passed away. All of this and so much more is what makes American Graffiti a unique film and a singular movie-watching experience. I'm thrilled to have been given the chance to share my thoughts on this film I hold so dear on the occasion of its 50th birthday. Thank you, Mr. Lucas.